Hello, story lovers. Tonight, we're diving into a tale of passion, secrets, and choices that could change everything. Hearts will be broken, love will be tested, and every twist will leave you on the edge of your seat. Comment below where you're watching from, and if this story moves you, hit like, subscribe. Share it with someone who loves a powerful love story, and tap the bell so you never miss the next thrilling chapter. Ready? Let's begin. The crystal chandeliers of the Winchester Grand Ballroom cast fractured rainbows across marble floors that reflected the hollow laughter of society's elite. Nathaniel Winchester adjusted his platinum cufflinks, the metal cold against his skin. Like everything else in his perfectly curated life, at 28, he possessed everything money could buy. Looks that graced magazine covers, a fortune that could purchase small countries, and a reputation that made mothers push their daughters toward him like sacrificial offerings. But tonight felt different. The champagne tasted flat on his tongue, and the familiar faces around him seemed like masks hiding nothing but emptiness. "Darling, you look absolutely divine," purred Cassandra Vale, her platinum hair catching the light as she pressed herself against his arm. Her dress cost more than most people's annual salary, and her smile was as cold and flawless as the diamonds at her throat. "You're radiant as always," Nathaniel replied automatically, his attention already wandering to the crowd of glittering strangers who weren't really strangers at all. His mother, Elena Winchester, materialized beside them like a force of nature. Wrapped in designer silk, her calculating eyes surveyed the room with military precision. "Nathaniel, darling, the Morettis have just arrived. Francesco specifically requested to meet you." Nathaniel's interest sharpened. Don Francesco Moretti was a name spoken in hushed tones throughout the business world. Officially, he ran legitimate enterprises. Unofficially, rumors swirled about connections that reached into shadows most people preferred not to acknowledge. The restaurant king with the mysterious portfolio, Nathaniel mused. This should be interesting. Elena's smile grew sharper. He's considering a significant investment in our new hotel chain. Partnership could be worth hundreds of millions. Be charming, but not too eager. Across the ballroom near the silent auction tables stood a man whose presence commanded respect without demanding attention. Don Francesco Moretti possessed the quiet authority of someone accustomed to having his words carry weight. Beside him stood a young woman who seemed to shrink into herself despite the formal setting. "Nathaniel Winchester," Francesco said warmly as they approached, extending his hand. "Your reputation precedes you. I've been following your expansion into the European markets with great interest." "The pleasure is entirely mine, Mr. Moretti," Nathaniel replied, matching the older man's firm handshake. "Your business acumen is legendary." Francesco's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Please, call me Francesco, and allow me to introduce my daughter, Rosalind." For the first time, Nathaniel's attention turned to the young woman beside her father. His initial impression was one of disappointed surprise. After the striking beauty of Cassandra and the polished elegance of his usual circle, Rosalind Moretti seemed almost deliberately unremarkable. She wore a navy blue dress that hung loosely on her small frame, chosen more for modesty than style. Her dark brown hair was pulled back severely, and behind wire-rimmed glasses, her eyes held an intelligence that Nathaniel barely noticed. Too caught up in his superficial assessment, "Miss Moretti," he said, with practiced charm, offering a brief nod that fell just short of true courtesy. "Mr. Winchester," she acknowledged quietly, her voice carrying a slight tremor that betrayed her nervousness in these glittering surroundings. The live orchestra began playing, and couples moved onto the dance floor in a choreographed display of wealth and status. Nathaniel had managed to avoid his mother's increasingly pointed looks until Francesco made a suggestion that trapped him completely. "Nathaniel, perhaps you would honor my daughter with a dance," Francesco said with the kind of request that wasn't really a request at all. Rosalind studied ballet in her youth. Elena appeared at Nathaniel's elbow as if summoned by invisible signals. What a delightful idea. Nathaniel is an excellent dancer. Nathaniel felt the walls closing in. Refusing would insult a man whose partnership could define the next decade of Winchester enterprises. Accepting meant subjecting himself to what he anticipated would be an awkward experience with a woman who seemed as eager to avoid the spotlight as he was to claim it. "It would be my pleasure," he said, the lie smooth as silk as he extended his hand toward Rosalind. Her hesitation was visible to everyone within a 10-foot radius. Her hands trembled as she set down her untouched champagne glass. "I'm not really much of a dancer," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the orchestral music. "It's just one dance," Nathaniel replied, his tone carrying more resignation than reassurance. But as her small, fragile hand settled into his, and he caught the faint scent of jasmine in her hair, something unexpected stirred in his chest. Something that felt dangerously close to anticipation. The orchestra struck up a classic waltz, and Nathaniel positioned himself with the precision of 2 years of expensive dance lessons. His hand found Rosalind's waist, maintaining exactly the proper distance that etiquette demanded. "Her hand in." His felt small and fragile, and he could sense the tension in her entire body like a live wire. From the moment they began moving, it was clear this would not be the effortless glide he was accustomed to. Rosalind's steps were uncertain, her timing slightly off, and her obvious nervousness made her movements stiff and awkward. Nathaniel found himself working harder than usual just to keep them in rhythm with the music. Around them, other couples moved with the fluid grace of people born to ballrooms. He caught sight of Cassandra dancing with James Sterling, her head thrown back in musical laughter, the picture of elegant enjoyment that made his current situation feel even more awkward by comparison. "Relax," he instructed, though his own body language suggested anything but patience. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "I told you I wasn't good at this," Rosalind said quietly, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment as she missed another step. Nathaniel's irritation grew with each stumble, each moment that reminded him how much he'd rather be anywhere else. His song seemed to stretch endlessly, and when Rosalind accidentally stepped on his foot for the second time, his patience finally frayed. "Perhaps we should return to the edge of the floor," he suggested with barely concealed annoyance. As the music concluded, Nathaniel felt a wave of relief he didn't bother to hide. He stepped back immediately, putting distance between himself and Rosalind, as if her awkwardness might be contagious. "Thank you for the dance," Rosalind said softly, her voice carrying a dignity that didn't quite mask her humiliation. Before Nathaniel could respond, Cassandra appeared beside them like a beautiful vulture, sensing wounded prey. Her smile was perfectly crafted, designed to look sweet while delivering maximum damage. "Oh my," Cassandra said, her voice carrying just far enough for nearby couples to hear. "That looked challenging. Nathaniel, you're such a gentleman to take on such a difficult partner. Most men wouldn't have the patience." The words hit their target with surgical precision. Nathaniel saw the color drain from Rosalind's face, watched as her eyes widened with the shock of such deliberate cruelty delivered under the guise of social pleasantry. "I suppose some people are just naturally graceful," Cassandra continued, her gaze traveling over Rosalind's modest dress with obvious disdain, "while others need considerably more practice before attempting something so public." The surrounding conversation paused as people sensed the social drama unfolding. Nathaniel stood frozen, caught between his loyalty to Cassandra and a growing sense that something terrible was happening in front of him. But Rosalind's response was not the tears or angry words many might have expected. Instead, she drew herself up to her full height and met Cassandra's cruel gaze with quiet dignity. "You're absolutely right," she said simply. "Some people are naturally graceful, and others have to work much harder to achieve the same result. Thank you for the reminder." The grace with which she accepted the insult somehow made it feel worse rather than better. Nathaniel found himself studying her face, really looking at her for the first time all evening. Behind her glasses, her dark eyes held intelligence, pain, and a strength he hadn't noticed before. "If you'll excuse me," Rosalind continued, addressing Nathaniel directly, "I believe I've provided enough entertainment for one evening." She turned away with careful composure, walking toward the edge of the ballroom where her father was deep in conversation with Nathaniel Winchester. But instead of interrupting, she continued past them, heading toward the grand staircase that led to the mansion's main entrance. Nathaniel watched her go, something uncomfortable stirring in his chest. The way she held herself as she walked away, the careful control that suggested she was fighting back tears, the dignity she maintained even in retreat. It all created a picture that made him feel smaller somehow. Francesco excused himself from His conversation with Alina and followed his daughter's path, his expression concerned but not surprised. As he passed Nathaniel, he paused for just a moment. "Some treasures," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that had nothing to do with business partnerships, are visible only to those wise enough to look beyond the surface. Then he too was gone, leaving Nathaniel standing on the dance floor with Cassandra's triumphant smile and a growing sense that something important had just slipped through his fingers. Later that night, as his driver navigated the city streets toward his penthouse, Nathaniel stared out at the glittering lights and found himself thinking about dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the quiet dignity with which Rosalind had handled Cassandra's cruelty. For the first time in his privileged life, Nathaniel Winchester wondered if he had missed something important by looking only at the surface of things. The thought was as uncomfortable as it was unfamiliar, suggesting that perhaps there were depths to the world that his wealth and status had never allowed him to explore. But 3 months later, when he saw her again, everything he thought he knew about Rosalind Moretti would shatter like crystal hitting marble. 3 months had passed since the charity gala, yet Nathaniel Winchester found himself unable to forget the quiet dignity in Rosalind Moretti's eyes as she walked away from the ballroom. The memory haunted him at unexpected moments during board meetings, while reviewing financial reports, even during intimate dinners with Cassandra. His penthouse office on the 42nd floor of Winchester Tower offered a commanding view of the city. But Nathaniel barely noticed the sprawling metropolis below. Instead, he stared at a business proposal from Francesco Moretti's companies, one that had arrived 2 weeks after the gala with no personal message attached. "You've been distracted lately, James," Sterling observed, settling into the leather chair across from Nathaniel's mahogany desk. "Cassandra mentioned you've been distant during your dates." "Business has been demanding," Nathaniel replied, setting down the Moretti proposal. "Since when has business ever made you brood like this?" James studied his friend with concern. "You haven't been yourself since that charity auction. The International Business Summit at the Grand Continental Hotel was the kind of event Nathaniel typically navigated with practiced ease. He moved through the reception hall with Cassandra on his arm, acknowledging greetings from familiar faces of high society. "Darling, there's Miranda Ashworth," Cassandra murmured, steering him toward a cluster of socialites. She just returned from her Mediterranean yacht tour, but Nathaniel's attention was caught by a commotion near the registration desk. A small crowd had gathered around someone, and he could hear fragments of animated conversation in multiple languages. Curiosity drew him away from Cassandra's planned social route. As he approached, the crowd parted slightly, and Nathaniel felt his breath catch in his throat. At the center of attention stood Rosalind Moretti, but she was transformed in ways that went far beyond mere physical appearance. Gone were the severe hairstyle and modest clothing. Her dark hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, framing a face that seemed to glow with confidence and intelligence. She wore a perfectly tailored burgundy suit that highlighted her petite figure without being ostentatious. But the most striking change was in her posture and demeanor. She stood straight, made eye contact with her listeners, and spoke with the authority of someone who expected to be heard. "The key to sustainable growth in emerging markets," she was saying in fluent Italian to a group of European investors, "lies not in imposing Western business models, but in understanding and adapting to local cultural dynamics. My research in Southeast Asia suggests that companies who partner with local leaders rather than compete with them see 30% higher retention rates." Nathaniel found himself moving closer, drawn by the intelligence and passion in her voice. This was not the awkward, uncomfortable young woman from the charity gala. This Rosalind spoke with expertise about international markets, quoted statistics with ease, and commanded the attention of seasoned business leaders who hung on her every word. "Miss Moretti," one of the investors said in accented English, "your father mentioned you completed your MBA at Oxford. Did your thesis focus on emerging market dynamics?" "Actually, I completed a dual degree program," Rosalind replied with a modest smile. "MBA from Oxford and a master's in international relations from the Sorbonne. My thesis examined the correlation between cultural sensitivity in business practices and long-term profitability in developing economies." Nathaniel felt something shift inside his chest. A combination of surprise, admiration, and something that might have been shame. Here was a woman with impressive academic credentials and obvious business acumen, and he had dismissed her based entirely on her appearance at a social event where she was clearly uncomfortable. Over the following hour, Nathaniel found himself gravitating toward wherever Rosalind was speaking. He listened as she discussed market analysis with a German automotive executive, debated trade policy with a British banker, and outlined investment strategies with venture capitalists. Her knowledge was comprehensive, her insights sharp, and her confidence magnetic. When she finally found herself momentarily alone, Nathaniel approached with careful strategy. "Miss Moretti," he said, offering his most charming smile, hoping we might have a chance to speak. "Your comments about emerging markets were fascinating." Rosalind turned to face him, and for a moment he saw recognition flicker in her eyes. But instead of the nervousness or discomfort he expected, her expression remained professionally neutral. "Mr. Winchester," she acknowledged with a polite nod. "I understand Winchester Enterprises is considering expansion into Southeast Asian markets. The hospitality industry presents unique challenges in that region." Her response was perfectly professional, giving no indication that they had any personal history beyond their brief introduction at the charity gala. The casual dismissal of their previous encounter was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. "I'd be very interested in hearing your thoughts on those challenges," Nathaniel said, moving slightly closer. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation over dinner." For the first time, Rosalind's professional composure wavered slightly. "I'm afraid my schedule is quite full while I'm in town. I'm only here for the summit before returning to London." "London?" The information surprised him. "You're living abroad?" "I've been working with an international consulting firm," she replied. "We specialize in helping multinational corporations navigate cultural complexities in emerging markets." Before Nathaniel could respond, Francesco appeared at his daughter's side, his expression unreadable as his eyes moved between them. "Nathaniel," Francesco said warmly, though his tone carried an undertone that made Nathaniel's skin prickle. "I see you've discovered what I've always known about my daughter. Brilliance has a way of revealing itself to those patient enough to look." The words carried weight, and Nathaniel felt the sting of implied criticism. But before he could formulate a response, Rosalind excused herself, disappearing into the crowd with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to avoiding uncomfortable situations. "She's remarkable," Nathaniel said to Francesco, the admission feeling like both a revelation and a confession. Francesco's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, she is. It's the question, my friend, is whether you're remarkable enough to deserve her." Attention. As Francesco walked away, leaving Nathaniel standing alone in the bustling reception hall, one thought echoed in his mind. He had to see her again, whatever it took. 6 weeks later, Nathaniel stood outside the sleek glass building in London's financial district, where Rosalind worked. He had flown across the Atlantic on a pretext of business meetings, but his real purpose was singular: to see her again. A woman who had haunted his thoughts since the business summit had become an obsession he could no longer ignore. Through the lobby's floor-to-ceiling windows, he watched her emerge from the elevator. She moved with the confident stride he remembered, her burgundy coat a splash of color against the sterile corporate environment. But when she saw him waiting, her steps faltered. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. As she approached, "I had business in London," he lied smoothly. "I thought perhaps we could have that dinner conversation we never finished." Her laugh was bitter. "You flew to London for a conversation with someone you couldn't be bothered to treat with basic courtesy 6 months ago?" "I made a mistake," Nathaniel said, the admission tasting foreign on his tongue. "I judged you unfairly, and I've regretted it ever since." "Have you?" Rosalind's eyes narrowed. "Or did you simply realize that I might be useful to you in ways you hadn't previously considered?" The accusation stung because it carried a grain of truth. His initial interest had been piqued by her professional competence, but somewhere along the way, it had become something deeper, more personal. "Give me one evening," he said. "Let me prove that I've changed." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "One evening, Mr. Winchester, but this isn't a business negotiation. This is me giving you exactly what you gave me. A chance to prove you're more than what you appear to be on the surface. They met at a small restaurant in Covent Garden, far from the glittering establishments where Nathaniel typically conducted his social life. The intimate setting forced conversation beyond professional pleasantries, and as the evening progressed, Nathaniel found himself genuinely engaged by Rosalind's intelligence and insight. "You're not what I expected," she said over wine, her guard finally beginning to lower. "What did you expect? Another entitled prince looking for a new acquisition?" Her honesty was refreshing and brutal. "But you actually listen when I speak. That's rarer than you might think." As weeks turned to months, their relationship deepened into something neither had anticipated. Nathaniel found himself making excuses to visit London, while Rosalind began to soften the professional armor she wore like a shield. Their conversations ranged from business to philosophy to dreams neither had shared with anyone else. "I've never felt this way about anyone," Nathaniel confessed one evening as they walked along the Thames. The London eye glittered in the distance, and Rosalind's hand was warm in his. "This scares me," she admitted. "Caring about someone who has the power to destroy me." "I would never hurt you," he said, stopping to face her. "Not again." But even as he spoke the words, Nathaniel knew he was walking a dangerous line. His relationship with Cassandra had become increasingly strained, and his mother's disapproval of his frequent trips to London was growing more vocal. The business partnership with Francesco was proceeding but slowly. As if the older man was testing Nathaniel's intentions, the betrayal came on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening in November. Nathaniel had returned to New York for what was supposed to be a brief business meeting, but Cassandra was waiting in his penthouse with champagne and devastating news. "Darling, I have the most wonderful surprise," she said, her smile predatory as she pressed a glass into his hands. "I know about your little London affair." Nathaniel's blood turned to ice. "Cassandra, I can explain." "Well, there's nothing to explain. In fact, I think it's perfect." She moved to the window, gazing out at the city lights with satisfaction. "See, I've been having my own little affair with James for months. But unlike you, I've been practical about it." The revelation hit him like a physical blow. His best friend and his girlfriend had been betraying him while he was falling in love with someone else. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. "But here's the brilliant part," Cassandra continued. "I've convinced your mother that your infatuation with the Moretti girl is just a phase. It's a way to secure the business deal with her father. Alina thinks you're playing a long game, using poor little Rosalind to cement the partnership before discarding her." "That's not true," Nathaniel said, his voice hollow. "Isn't it?" Cassandra's laugh was like breaking glass. "Because tomorrow morning, the society pages are going to run a lovely story about our engagement, complete with quotes from Alina about how relieved she is that you've come to your senses and stopped pursuing unsuitable foreign girls." The engagement announcement appeared in 3 major newspapers the next morning, along with a photograph of Nathaniel and Cassandra at a charity function from months earlier. By the time Nathaniel could book a flight to London, the damage was done. He found Rosalind in her office. The newspapers spread across her desk like evidence at a crime scene. She didn't look up when he entered. "Rosalind, please let me explain." "Explain?" "What?" Her voice was deadly quiet. "That everything you said was a lie? That I was just another business transaction to you?" "That's not true. I love you." She finally looked at him, and the pain in her eyes was devastating. "Do you love the idea of me?" It's a challenge I represented. "The daughter of the man whose partnership you needed. You know me better than that." "I thought I did. But then I remembered something my father taught me years ago. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. And you showed me exactly who you were the night we met." She stood, moving to the window with her back to him. "I'm flying back to Italy tonight. My father has decided not to proceed with the Winchester partnership after all." The words hit him like a sledgehammer. "Rosalind, please don't do this. Let Cassandra's manipulation destroy what we have." "What we have." She turned, and her expression was colder than he had ever seen it. "We never had anything, Nathaniel. I was just foolish enough to believe in a fairy tale where the prince actually changed." As she walked past him toward the door, she paused. "Congratulations on your engagement. I'm sure Cassandra will make you very happy." The door closed behind her with devastating finality. leaving Nathaniel alone with the wreckage of the best thing that had ever happened to him and the terrible knowledge that he had no one to blame but himself. 2 years passed like a slow bleed. Nathaniel had broken off the engagement with Cassandra within days of returning from London, but the damage was already done. Winchester Enterprises suffered without the Moretti partnership, and his reputation in business circles took a significant hit. His mother barely spoke to him. James had been cut from his life entirely, and the penthouse that once felt like a palace now felt like an elegant prison. But it was the silence from Italy that haunted him most. Despite hiring the best private investigators money could buy, all he learned was that Rosalind had returned to Milan and seemed to have vanished from the international business scene entirely. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. Francesco's. The voice was strained, older than Nathaniel remembered. "She's dying," Francesco said without preamble. "The cancer has spread, and the treatments aren't working anymore. She has perhaps weeks." Nathaniel's world tilted on its axis. "I'm coming to Italy. She doesn't want to see you. She's made that very clear, but I'm calling because—" Francesco's voice broke. "Because she still has your business card in her wallet. After everything, she still carries it." Milan in spring should have been beautiful, but Nathaniel barely noticed the blooming flowers or warming sunshine. He rented a small apartment across from the private hospital where Rosalind was being treated, watching from a distance like a ghost haunting his own regrets. Through careful observation and well-placed inquiries, he learned that experimental treatments were available in Switzerland. Treatments that might buy her more time or even save her life. They were expensive, not covered by insurance, and required immediate action. Francesco found him sitting in the hospital cafe 3 days after his arrival. "You're wasting your time," the older man said, settling into the chair across from him. "She won't see you." "I know, but I can't leave." Francesco studied him with tired eyes. "She told me what happened in London. About the engagement announcement. I never proposed to Cassandra. It was all her manipulation. My mother's machinations." Nathaniel's voice was hollow. "But that doesn't matter now, does it? I still made choices that hurt her." "Yes, you did." Francesco's honesty was brutal but fair. "The question is, what are you willing to do to make amends?" That evening, Nathaniel made the most important decision of his life. He liquidated his personal investment portfolio, sold his art collection, and used his shares in Winchester Enterprises as collateral for loans that would bankrupt him if they were called in. Within 48 hours, he had transferred enough money to cover Rosalind's experimental treatments and ongoing care. But he did it all anonymously, routing the funds through Swiss banks and medical foundations so they could never be traced back to him. On the transfer documents, he listed the source as someone who believes in second chances. The night before, Rosalind was scheduled to fly to Switzerland. Nathaniel waited in the hospital garden. He had written her a letter, everything he had been unable to say 2 years ago. Everything he felt, everything he regretted, everything he hoped for her future, even if he wasn't part of it. Francesco appeared as if summoned, and Nathaniel handed him the sealed envelope. "She doesn't have to read it now or ever," Nathaniel said. "But someday, maybe when she's healthy again and living the life she deserves, she might want to know that someone loved her enough to let her go." "The treatments are expensive," Francesco said carefully. "She asked me who was paying for them." "Anonymous donor. Medical foundation." "Does it matter?" Nathaniel managed a sad smile. "All that matters is that she gets the chance I took away from us, and what about you? Winchester Enterprises without your personal backing, without the Moretti partnership, ... will survive or it won't. Some things are more important than money." Francesco was quiet for a long moment. "She loved you, you know. Really loved you. That's why it hurts so much. I know. And that's why I have to do this." As Nathaniel walked away from the hospital for the last time, Francesco called after him. "The letter. If she recovers, if the treatments work, and if she asks about the anonymous donor." Nathaniel paused at the garden gate, not turning around.
"Tell her that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone you love is the chance
to live without the weight of your mistakes." 6 months later, Nathaniel read in a small business journal that Rosalind Moretti had made a full recovery and had started her own consulting firm in Geneva, specializing in sustainable business. Practices for Emerging Markets. The article mentioned her innovative approaches to corporate social responsibility and her work with various charitable foundations. He kept the clipping in his wallet, right next to a small photograph taken on their last evening in London, when she had laughed at something he said and looked at him like he might actually be worthy of her love. Winchester Enterprises had indeed survived, though much diminished. Nathaniel worked harder than he ever had before, not for the money or status, but because honest work had become his penance and his path to redemption. He never tried to contact Rosalind again. His love, he had learned, sometimes meant knowing when to hold on and when to let go. Sometimes the greatest sacrifice wasn't dying for someone, but living with the knowledge that you had set them free. On quiet evenings, in his smaller apartment, with its view of the city lights and its absence of crystal chandeliers, Nathaniel would think about dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and wonder if she was happy. It was enough, he told himself. It had to be enough. In Switzerland, Rosalind Moretti built a life of purpose and meaning, surrounded by work she loved and people who valued her mind as much as her heart. Sometimes, on quiet evenings in her apartment, overlooking Lake Geneva, she would take out a worn business card and a letter she had never been brave enough to read. But that night never came. Some bridges once burned could only be honored in memory. And perhaps that was its own kind of love. The kind that asked for nothing and gave everything. The kind that transformed golden princes into men who understood that true wealth wasn't measured in possessions, but in the courage to sacrifice for someone else's happiness. Some stories don't end with reconciliation or redemption. Some end with the quiet dignity of accepting the consequences of our choices and finding grace in the space between what was and what might have been, the end.